Hi, welcome to our Training for Texas Museums webcast. Today we're going to talk about strategic planning, and I have with us Brian Crockett, who's been teaching our workshop on strategic planning, Small Museum GPS, Finding a Quick Way Through the Strategic Planning Wilderness, and Ruth Rugg, Executive Director of the Texas Association of Museums. And they're just going to have a little conversation this morning about strategic planning.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, Brian. How you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
Planning.
You know, we get a lot of calls at the TAM office about strategic planning, especially from smaller museums that really want to know where to start. So, who plans?
Who plans?
Who plans?
The planning responsibility for any institution resides with the board. It's the board that's responsible for setting the policy and direction of any nonprofit institution. Now, trying to get the board to understand that responsibility is sometimes a stretch, and it's particularly difficult for small institutions where those roles tend to be a little fuzzy.
Well, for instance, there are a lot of small museums in Texas that don't even have paid staff. They have all volunteers. So how do you approach that if everyone is a volunteer and they're more or less equal in the way they approach it?
You're right that the vast majority of, a very simple majority of museums are all volunteer. And that's true in Texas, and that's also true across our country. And it is particularly difficult for them. But it's first worth acknowledging that they're all doing their planning at present. It's all going on right now. It's just perhaps not being done in a way that's as intentional as it might be done, that will realize the greatest change for them and get them sort of ahead of the game. So in recognizing that, one of the first things they need to do is find a way to assign some roles that are very, very specific. And sometimes that means breaking a few eggs in the name of change. And when you have a working board at a small museum, they are used to doing everything, right?
Right.
They plant the pansies outside, and they put the flag up in the morning, and they are the volunteers, and they are the policy makers, and they communicate with the city council and the county commissioners and everybody. But this is a moment, if you're going to plan well, to be able to step back and say, there is a role here for a volunteer, and there is a role for a staff member, paid or unpaid, and there is a role specifically for the board. And that's the first best step to be ready for planning.
Well, how do you know when you're ready? Is there a right time? Is there a better time?
Well, I would say the answer to that is contained a little bit in your question about sort of what those responsibilities are. You want to plan at the moment in which you have a board that is ready for change and is hopeful about change and really is game for imagining what could be rather than what is. And that's a hard thing to do if you've come to your small institution rooted in your love of community and rooted in those objects that give you some sort of founding and sense of place. And for a lot of small museums, they're peppered with people that are protecting their own family's history.
Right.
So it's hard for them to let go of some of that and say a new vision. It might mean changing how we educate, changing how we operate. And so it can be done a little bit with some difficulty. So it's a fuzzy way for me to answer your question, but when you are ready to change, it's when your leadership and board roles are clarified, if you will.
Right. Well, you know, you mentioned vision, and I think a lot of people have a hard time determining the difference between a mission and a vision. And what is the visioning function in planning? And when does it take place? Is it something you necessarily start with, or does it come a little bit later?
Yeah. You know, I ran into in one of these workshops here just recently somebody who mentioned that they had created a new direction for the museum based on a founder who stepped into a board meeting and said, "I had a dream last night."
Really?
Yeah. Now, that's not necessarily recommended. There are better ways, I think, for us to go about the visioning exercises. One of them is, so now let's pretend that our small museum has figured out that it is in fact the board's responsibility, and that we even have we have a staff member who has decided that, you know, she used to be on the board. Now she's accepted the staff role, even though she's not paid.
Right.
And she's going to head things through on the operational side. Then it's going to be the task of this group to be able to get in touch with what it is that their museum could best be. That comes in lots of different ways, with a number of prompts from our field and from professional input from folks like you all, you know, that are constantly peppering these folks with ideas that stretch them in new ways. Now, that doesn't mean that every single idea is a good fit for every museum, but they have to look onto the horizon to be strategic in terms of figuring out what need exists in their communities and what their public service is and where they fit in order to be able to serve that. So visioning is a huge part of planning. In fact, to my mind, mission and vision constitute as much as 50% of the battle in strategic planning.
Wow.
So, and sometimes many, many more. But there's more to be said on that. And
All right.
far more than what we could do here.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.